Okay, I'm Kim Brophey, and I'm the owner of the Dog Door Behavior Center in Asheville. And I am an applied ethologist and also a certified dog behavior consultant and trainer.
So, help for those of us in the lay public, the applied ethologist. What is that specialty?
Well, it's not surprising that you asked because it's a phrase you don't hear much, particularly in the US. It's a field that's very largely represented in Europe, and it refers to the study of animal behavior in captive or domesticated species and how that intersects with human behavior in those environments. So you may be studying companion animals like dogs, cats, birds, horses, etc., or livestock animals or animals in laboratory settings, but it's particularly interested in what happens when you take a captive or domesticated, or in some cases both, animal and put it in a human environment and how human behavior then interacts with that animal's behavior.
Wow, that and you focus on dogs.
Just dogs, yes.
Do you have special areas of interest within that field for dogs?
I would say all of it, right? Because for me, it's the relationship, and it goes from my concern client to client that comes in the door with a misunderstood puppy that's exhibiting normal behavior, and the person has presumptions about what the animal is doing and why, and I can clear up any miscommunications and help get everyone on the same page, to an animal that's exhibiting abnormal behavior because of dysfunctional relationships between the genetics and the environment they've found themselves in, and we can help put a plan in place to resolve those kinds of conflicts. And also in my community, as well as national community, for clearing up common cultural misunderstandings and common practices or poor practices about how people are interacting and living with their pets in the modern age.
Can you give me an example of some of those poor practices?
One of my favorites, or I should say less favorites, is the practice of thinking we have the right to pet everyone's dog and that a good dog wants everyone to pet them. We treat them in a way like fuzzy prostitutes that we have been somehow globally entitled to manhandle. And if you think about how inappropriate that is there any other species on the face of the planet, including our own, that wants to be groped by individuals they've never met? Now, there are exceptions. There are some dogs that, just like some people, absolutely revel in the attention from anyone and everything walking down the street. Perfect example is kind of your classic epitome golden retriever, right? And there are those dogs, but people don't realize those are actually abnormal within the greater population of dogs. And most dogs are more akin to how most of us would feel being approached by and touched by invasively someone that they've never met. And so when a dog behaves, communicating or acting out otherwise, that they're uncomfortable in those situations, growling, barking, backing up, baring their teeth, we label the dog as bad or the person as a bad owner, which is a completely inaccurate judgment of the situation and perpetuates a cycle of misunderstanding and ultimately euthanasia of millions of dogs every year in this country.
You brought a good point. It is that human nature. You see the dog, it's cute, and the first thing we do is reach out and want to touch, right?
Yeah, and this is reflexive for me. It's funny because I laugh at myself in here. I might have the cutest thing on four legs walk in, and every bit in me is boiling over with maternal oxytocin pulsing through my veins, and I want to grab it by the cheeks and kiss it. And yet I know that's not what the dog wants. None of its behavior, maybe for a whole hour, has asked or invited me to touch it. So I have to respect that animal's experience and where they're coming from so that I can meet that dog for who they are, where they are.
What's the kind of interaction you'd like to see? How can we correct that?
So it's interesting because if you look at countries like Germany, many countries in Europe actually, and the way that they behave culturally with their dogs, I wish that we could model something after that. And I'm really aiming to create one of the first cities in the United States, which we're trying to stake a claim as Dog City USA for here in Asheville, as modeling after places like Germany, where people take their dogs everywhere, restaurants, stores, they accompany them everywhere their people go. The dogs don't interact with the other dogs, and the people don't pet other people's dogs. Everyone's minding their own business. If you think about it, just as if we were walking down the street with our children or our family or our friends, if we have a reason to speak to someone else, or a common thread for why we might get together and have a conversation, or maybe even play after some familiarity and hopefully foreplay, then they can evolve to that. But the idea that we just stop and pet everyone's dogs, or that all dogs should stop and socialize in the middle of the street, is part of what's created the mass problem we're having of leash reactivity and unmanageability. That is the number one complaint that behavior consultants are seeing. And among my peers and my colleagues, we are increasingly of the shared belief that we have actually accidentally over-socialized the last few generations of dogs, where we had previously under-socialized dogs. Now we have over-socialized them, and we're paying the consequences.
Is there another one that tops your list along with automatically petting animals?
Well, I think another one that we hear and see a lot of evidence about is the misunderstanding about what dominance is. People have effectively confused domineering with dominance. Scientifically, dominance means control of the resources and the situation. If you think of that like good management, you're on top of the situation, you make good decisions, you know the destination, you're reading the road hazards, right? Like a good parent, you're just on top of things, that's all, and executing control of life. Domineering is I have to control you, and it's a battle of wills, and it's a struggle, and I have to have control over you. And that is the source of so much friction between people and dogs, and honestly, a lot of self-defense related aggression from dogs.
What would be a better environment?
Right. So it's interesting because, again, there's this thread of what feels right in there of, well, I feel like I should be the one making the decisions, right? Well, sure, the dog's not going to take the car keys, go to the grocery store and pick up dinner, nor are they going to get a job and provide for the family. It makes sense that we should just be kind of calling the shots day to day so that we can run a smooth household. Fair enough. But again, that's about controlling life as it happens. So simple things like being prepared for a moment as it transpires so that the dog is not rehearsing a behavior, say jumping all over your guests, just so that you sit there and yank on their collars and say, no, bad, sit down, what have you, trying to control the animal. Instead, you say, someone's at the door. If you choose to greet them politely with your feet on the floor or your rear on the ground, you'll find you can stay in the environment. If you don't choose to do that, I've thought ahead, left a leash on you, which if you jump on them, I could then pick up the end of that leash, walk you into the other room, and put you on the other side of a baby gate. I've managed to demonstrate I can control the situation, and your choices will have an effect on what that situation looks like, but your choices are always yours to make. That makes an animal think, feel respected, being given the dignity of making their own decisions, and yet within a structure that keeps everybody safe and has the clarity of, I need to be making the decisions.
You mentioned Dog City USA. This is a huge, Asheville and Western North Carolina loves dogs.
Right.
This is what will go into making this Dog City USA.
So what we're trying to do is, in concert with my book coming out in December, Meet Your Dog, which is supposed to be really, we're hoping, the first national translation of these multidisciplinary sciences and all of these practical principles for dog owners where they can understand it. In timing with the delivery of that book, we are trying to launch Asheville as the city that has already demonstrated we are stepping it up and raising the bar for public education and practices from the science that we have available in how we're living with our dogs. This is one of the most dog-friendly cities in the U.S. If you go around downtown Asheville, you'll find almost every store allows dogs. Most restaurants have outdoor seating that accommodates dogs. We have tons of breweries and different activities and things you can do with your dog, all targeted at share life with your dog. If we go about this wrong, if we go about it in following the patterns and the practices that we've had in place of over socializing and just winging it and letting every dog go up to every dog and not having certain agreements about what does it look like when you're in a restaurant with your dog? What does it look like when you're in a store with your dog? What's good etiquette? What's good practice? How do you respect the feelings of other dogs and other owners? If we don't have some shared agreements and knowledge about how to do this in regard for the whole community and everyone visiting our community, it's going to fail. It's going to blow up in our face. So we are trying to market it that way, and as a very critical part of that, educate the businesses that we've tagged as being the top 100 in Asheville every year that represent these shared values and have showed a commitment to doing it right.
So what would that mean? And you said restaurants, and I think, you see dogs going over to each other's dogs and look at my dog and that kind of thing all the time. What are the goofs you see, and what kind of environment would you like to see in a restaurant?
Right. Well, you can imagine being a waitress in a restaurant where everyone's winging it, and what a disaster it might feel like simply trying to bring someone their French fries and their soda, right? If the dogs are visiting between tables, if they're on retractable leashes that are getting tangled around someone's chair, or if you put the leash under your chair or the table, which then upends the whole table, if you're letting them go up and sniff every single person who walks by, some of whom might be frightened by dogs or not want to greet your dog, then we're making it difficult for everybody. I like, again, the model that we have like in Germany, countries like that, where the animals come in and they lay down under the table, much like you'd imagine service dogs should be behaving, I think would be a better aim for us to have. And you'd be surprised how easy it is to teach dogs these structures of what looks like service dog level obedience of behavior, when actually it's just a tremendous favor and relief to them of putting predictable patterns in place, just like you would for a kid, of when we go into this situation, this is what we do. And when we go into this situation, this is what we do. And so it takes all the ambiguity and unpredictability and the loaded stress of who's going to walk in and what's that dog going to do and what's that person going to do off the table for the dog, so they can simply enjoy being out to eat with their family.
Yeah, that's so true. And you're doing some of this with the Humane Society? Is this part of the...
Yes. Asheville Humane Society is an incredible organization I'm proud to be on the board of here in Asheville. They're breaking all sorts of molds as an animal shelter in the United States and raising the whole concept in their own right of a no-kill animal shelter, going beyond the concept of no-kill to establish that all animals have a right to quality of life, a life worth living, where their psychological and behavioral health is factored into life at the shelter and life in this community. And they have all sorts of initiatives on the ground that reflect those values, that it's not enough to just be alive. And it's the same type of education that is making the difference in terms of what we're trying to establish here with the Dog Door and Dog City USA, for getting people to understand the root of behavioral dysfunction and what our role is as their stewards in resolving it, whether it's here, the home, in the community, or at the shelter.
And I want to get back to the science. So how did you fall into the interest of science? Did the dog come first, or were you science and then the animals came next?
Well, funny enough, I never really thought of dogs as being a potential for science. I was the kid who simultaneously grew up reading National Geographics and refused to read the novels and assignments for summer reading, and also grew up in Atlanta at a time when all the dogs were still loose. And so as a very young child, I was obsessed, for whatever reason, with the neighborhood's free dogs, which included my own, the neighbors' dogs, etc. And there's a lot of family pictures of me just surrounded by these neighborhood dogs. And I would seek them out, and as well as my own when I'd come home after school, geeky little kid playing with her golden retriever on the back porch, trying to figure out how to get her to do things, or trying to understand how she worked and what she thought and how she felt. And that translated into an interest in training, which simply fell off my radar as a young kid when I got into my first obedience class. Felt like I was witnessing, as a young kid, socially condoned animal abuse in the name of dog training, squarely told my parents I didn't want to do that, and thought I would get into just the social sciences. When I was in college, I thought I would just do service and therapy dog training because it seemed like a win-win in a training and behavior world where there wasn't an obvious win-win in place. I continue to do service and therapy dog training now, but ended up focusing more on the behavior consulting aspect. But studying from the perspective of applied ethology meant that I had to look at things from an interdisciplinary approach, because from the lens of applied ethology, you can't ignore the environment. So you have to factor in things like genetics, neurology, ecology, evolutionary biology, psychology, behaviorism. You have to look at the big picture and how the interplay of those variables affects the ultimate behavior that we're witnessing. And what I found was, in trying to explain it early in my career, I would overwhelm myself and others, because the more I learned and the more science I read, the more fascinated I was, the more I felt like I got it. But it was so difficult to sum it all up. That's the reason that I created the LEGS framework, which is what the presentation on Friday is going to be about, so that it's a simple model that everyone can use to talk about behavior comprehensively without getting overwhelmed.
Can you tell me about that? Tell me about legs.
Sure. So legs is really the absorption of maybe 20 plus scientific disciplines into 4 basic components for the sake of being able to talk about it. So let's say you brought me a dog and you said, well, he's nipping at the children in the house, and he's chasing his tail, and he's barking all the time. Okay? If I just look at that from the perspective of L, learning, as many trainers have historically, then I'm just interested in how to punish the behavior or how to reinforce the behavior, an alternate behavior, or what ideas the dog might have. That's all very legitimate science, okay? And there can be a bit of psychology around that to help fill in a few blanks. But let's say I haven't even really dug into the question of environment, of habitat, okay? Or of genetics, what that dog is bringing to the table. What if I miss the fact that I might have a square peg in a round hole, or a tool applied to the wrong job? Maybe I have a border collie bred to work 18-hour days on a farm, micromanaging other living things, who's in a condo, in a crate for 18 plus hours a day, with no mental stimulation, no set of structure and predictability, in a world filled with chaos, stress, overwhelmment. And so genetically, that animal, bred to be a micromanager of the natural world in an impossibly uncontrolled environment, understimulated, overconfined, I have a square peg in a round hole issue. And if I ignore that, those fundamental principles of behavioral ecology and evolutionary biology that tell us every species has a niche, and outside that niche, every wild animal will suffer and will behave abnormally, dysfunctionally, right? If they're in the wrong habitat. If I've taken a border collie and I've artificially selected it for generations to do something so specific that that genetic information is in the dog's genetic software, their DNA, that animal can't help but to perform a certain way when the toddlers go squealing through the house. It comes over the animal like life clicking start on a software program, and it happens to the dog as much as it happens to the kid. So if I can't talk about the E, the environment, and the G, the genetics, and then add in the self, maybe I have an intact male in the peak of his adolescence, just feeling the blinding thrill of testosterone for the first time, who also happens to have a bowel disorder that's making him in chronic discomfort, and he's only getting out to the bathroom twice a day. We start seeing the picture come together. And so all of those components, all these different fields that kind of tie into one particular area of focus, all have their voice within learning, environment, genetics, or self. And that simple framework means that we at least won't leave any major stone unturned. And I can only hope that talking to people on a day-to-day basis has just taught me how to listen enough to understand where the person is coming from, and what their perceptions are and the language that's going to be the most effective in speaking to them. I am more academically minded the way my brain works, and I have to remember to filter back out to common sense and practicality. And over 10 years of processing this information and wanting to passionately share it with people because of the difference it can make has made me try to reinvent the language over and over again just to have it make sense, because I feel like this is life-changing and life-saving information for so many dogs and people.
Because I think we all think we're doing the right thing, right? We're petting and we're friendly and we're dog-friendly people, and that's what they want because they're wagging their tail. And then we're in control, so we don't have a bad dog that no one wants to come in. But,
Right. It's so much messier than that, just like real relationships with people. And I think that's one of the things we're trying to get people to understand here at the Dog Door. That's the cornerstone of my book, is it's a relationship. And it is just as complicated as a human relationship. Oversimplifying that dog is not going to help anything. Yes, we need to be able to talk about it. That's what Legs is for, to just be able to break it down at all into something that we can even discuss. But this is just like anything, as complicated as any human relationship. And there are good things and bad things and hard things. There's baggage. There's weird ideas. There's habits that get put in place. There are environmental constraints that cause us to behave in completely wacky ways. There's miscommunications, and if we don't sort all of that out and start speaking to each of the pieces, we're bound to fail. We're bound to say that's a bad dog, or it's a bad owner, which is our fallback. When we don't think it's a bad dog, we just blame the person, which is no more fair, or ourselves. I can't tell you how many people just beat themselves up all the time because they think they're failing to be an alpha. And my field hasn't done much to help that, to make people feel less guilty for not being dominant enough. We have to start approaching this from a almost family therapy perspective of helping everybody get on the same page and have a contract of a relationship.
Yeah. Is there anything else? Did I pull out anything, or do you want to add anything?
The only thing I guess that I want people to know is if they're excited about this whole concept of promoting information and good science for the benefit of people and dogs in Asheville, get involved with Asheville Humane Society and the Life Worth Living Project, or get involved in Dog City USA. You can either nominate a business as a top 100 or even your own business. You can become a patron member, and you can just stay involved, attend these types of educational events, make sure you're sharing good information with your friends, your family, your neighbors, so that we can all try to establish the most truly dog-friendly city in the U.S., put Asheville on the map, and when that map comes out next year for a dog-friendly map of Asheville with the top 100 dog-friendly things to do in the city, use it, enjoy it, share it with others, and be proud that we're part of a city that in many ways is breaking the mold for the betterment of all.
Awesome. We just have a little work to do, right?
Yeah, just a little bit. That's okay. Patience, right?
That's word project. Yeah.